Welcome to the second episode of the first series of the Women in CX Talk Trends podcast, a new series dedicated to bringing you the latest news and insights from female leaders in CX and technology. On a mission to ensure women are at the centre of important conversations, join me, Claire Muscat, and my inspiring guests as we debate the hottest topics and explore current trends, helping you stay ahead of the curve of the latest developments shaping customer, employee, and women's experiences. In today's episode, sponsored by CoreMiner, I'll be chatting to Jill Donoghue, Senior Director of Business, Strategy and Analytics, about the question, can women really have it all? We'll explore evolving women's choices around marriage and children, the ongoing wage gap, and shifting attitudes towards social and economic issues. We'll discuss critical needs for investment in career development, the broken rung hindering women from stepping into leadership roles, and now, as women are being asked to return to the office, the impact that the loss of flexible working might have on the future female talent pipeline. Hi Jill, welcome to the Inspiring Women in CX Talks Trends podcast. How are you doing today?
Great. How are you, Claire? It's good to see you.
Yeah, I'm good. It's Friday afternoon here in the UK and we've got sun for a change, which in October is rare.
Yeah. I've been there in October, so yes, I remember.
Yeah, I got plenty of layers on today. And also welcome to everybody who's listening or watching wherever you are as well. So just to kick things off, Jill, I'm sure the audience would like to get to know you a little better. Can you tell us a bit about how you arrived at where you are today and your role at CoreMiner?
Sure. I took a very circuitous route to get to CoreMiner. I had a lot of jobs early on in my career that were, the only company to do what they did. And so when I would go interview for a different company or a different job, I couldn't just say, oh, I am a accountant or I am a this, I am a that, because they were different. So I always had to focus on what my skills were and things like that. I was working in things like telecom and mortgage-backed securities and finance recruiting and process consulting and operational audit and all kinds of different things. But about, I'd say 6 or 7 years ago, I found myself in the customer experience industry. I was working in consulting and consulting customers on their customer experience. And I loved it. I just think it's a fun industry and it touches everybody. I mean, everyone's a customer of something. And so while we were doing some projects and some things like that, I became aware of conversational intelligence and tools like CallMiner, and got to know some of them. And then CallMiner was looking, I started off at CallMiner running our BPO team because I had come from a BPO. That's where my consulting experience was. And so looked over here, got the job. And over the last almost 2 years, I would say, I've been running our professional services organization over here. So all of the business analysts that our customers can utilize to help them unlock the value from CallMiner, they all roll up to me. And it's been really fun. It's a really talented group of people. So I'm enjoying it immensely. And I know we might talk about it in a minute, but we just got back from our customer conference and down in Dallas, Texas. And it was great and so fun. And that's how I ended up here.
Yeah, and day one was the Women's Resource Group Conference, right? So the Women's Conference.
Yes.
Yeah, which leads me perfectly into my second question, which is actually I was going to ask you to talk a little bit about CoreMiner's Women Employee Resource Group, what inspired it and how it's grown since you started it. And I'm sure that will include in-person events for your customers as well.
Absolutely. So when I was at a company, it's a different name now, but it was a telecom company probably about 10 years ago. I first heard about employee resource groups, and this company had a lot of different ones, veterans and LGBTQ plus and a women's one. And it was kind of neat. They had a day where you could go down to, we had a cafeteria on campus, and it was a large campus company. And they had, each one had sort of a booth to say, oh, hey, here's what we do. And I thought that was so neat. And so I walked up to the women's one and said, what is all this about? And they talked about, connecting with women and supporting them and bringing in speakers and things like that. And so I joined the one at that company. And at that time, I was still, I was probably like 10 years into my career, so somewhat still early. And I loved it. I found it incredibly helpful. It was great to meet women, and especially ones across the different areas of the company that I didn't normally interact with. And so they had different perspectives, and it was nice to get to know people that weren't in my immediate work group. So when I joined CallMiner, we had kicked off a DEI council, and I was part of that as well. And one day we decided to discuss, hey, should we do some employee resource groups here? And so we decided each one needed a sponsor, someone who was going to run it and was passionate about it. And I immediately raised my hand. I want to do a women's one. The one that I was able to be a part of was so impactful to me, and I wanted to create that and be able to do that here. And so we have, and we're the longest running ERG that we have at CallMiner, and it's been great. And to kind of parry it into what you were asking about too, at our conference, we've been running a women's summit now for the last 3 years. This was our third year on Monday. Thank you. Yeah. And before that, and before, our conference used to be in person, and then the pandemic, and we had some virtual, much like everybody else. So back when it was in person before that, they'd wanted to do, and this was before I joined the company, they wanted to do a women's thing, but it kind of ended up being more of like a happy hour and just kind of people getting together and chatting. And so 3 years ago was the first full women's summit. And someone at our company named Loretta Campestri, who I believe has been on this podcast too.
Yeah.
She really spearheaded the creation of the first one, and it was outstanding. And of course, I attended that very first one when I was new to CallMiner, and said, "Oh my goodness, I want to be involved in this." And then, I was super involved last year and this year, and this was our third year, and we all agreed this was the best one yet. We had the most diverse audience. We had a lot more males attending. We had a panel on allyship that just kind of brought down the house. There was like standing room only. And so it couldn't have gone better. And we're just so excited to continue to expand it and bring it to the CallMiner conference each year.
Well, that's amazing. And I know, having been in the CX tech space events rooms as a speaker myself, usually it is predominantly male audiences, isn't it, as well? And I know, talking to women at those kinds of events, they say actually a lot of women are put off coming because they know it's just going to be wall-to-wall guys. So being able to create that safe space for women, I think, is a sign to say, you're wanted here. We're going to put something on the Monday, especially to welcome you to be part of this bigger event. And a lot of companies don't do that. And I think I talk to a lot of women, and they definitely feel excluded, particularly from like the data and technology type events more broadly. And all the speakers are always men, and like
Yeah, and
just all
I
sorts.
think what's been helping too is being able to show the value of it to attendees so that they can go back to the people that are approving their travel and things like that. Because I think in the past, sometimes the women that were coming to our conference, the people approving their travel would say, well, there's a couple workshops at that same time. We need you to go to the technical one and make sure you're doing everything you can to learn how to technically use our software. But, the rest of the conference is all about that. You can attend a ton of breakout sessions. And this year we talked about things like overcoming perfectionism, leadership styles, and things like that. That improves people's performance at work, no matter what role you're in. And so I think that the secret's out, and that's been getting out, and that's been allowing, more people to be able to get that extra day, come early, and attend the Women's Summit.
Yeah, and get so much more out of it in terms of your own professional development too. That's so cool.
Absolutely.
And you mentioned this allyship panel that brought down the house, which again, perfect segue into my next question, because I know allyship is a subject that's super close to your heart. And I'm going to bring in some stats here, which is, according to the latest Global Gender Gap Report, it can take up to 134 years for women to achieve equality to men. That's almost 5 generations. And that is such a super daunting timeline. It's clear that something really has to change now. And I know allyship, particularly male allyship, is a real big focus for you. As you mentioned, you already had that panel, and sharing that not only thought leadership, but bringing people together to discuss it. I know that it's a big focus for you. So why exactly do you think it's so critical for men to actively support and advocate for gender equality? And how do you think male allyship can help to accelerate that progress? Big question.
Yeah, lots of pieces. So first of all, in the allyship panel that we had, we were super excited to have our CEO join the panel. And the best part was when we asked him to join, he said, "I'm so honored. I'll clear my schedule. I'll do anything I need to do to be there." And that was outstanding. So we had 3 people on the panel. A woman program owner who'd been working with us for quite some time, an analyst, and they've actually been an analyst for 2 different customers of ours, and then our CEO. And he said during it as well, and what I think is why it's important for males is because there's this amount of privilege. And he said the first thing you have to do is reflect on what kind of privilege you have. Because people have it, and that's okay. So reflect on it, accept it, and then use it for good. So I think that, in corporate America, and especially in our industry, like we talked about, it's still pretty male dominated. So we need the help of those individuals to help women and other,
minorities.
other minority or, marginalized groups.
Marginalized groups.
Yeah, I know.
Women are not a minority, right? We're 50% of the population.
I used to say I'm writing my if and trying not to, because a lot of these groups are starting to be the majority of people, but still marginalized, which again, a whole nother subject. But I think, a lot of them are on boards and in leadership, and, so using their help is really helpful, and them being self-aware enough to recognize the privilege they have and then use that for good for things like this. Like our CEO, right? You go to a conference and you want to hear the CEO speak. That's amazing, right? And so he identified this location as doing so. And then we were able to bring up things that, a lot of men aren't aware of. I would say, one of the most impactful moments in that panel is our analyst. They brought up a question and they said, you never can really put yourself in someone else's shoes, but you can listen to them and try and understand what it's like. And so they used an example, and they said, for example, ask your sisters, daughters, grandmas, mothers, what it feels like to go to the doctor and not be believed. And you should have heard the room. Every woman was like, yes, absolutely. And most men, if not every man, was like, what? That's a thing? Oh my, I mean, some of my analysts on my team came up to me afterwards and they said, I had no idea that was a thing. I've never experienced that. Can you tell me more about it? And I said, yeah. And so I think that, just learning and expanding your experiences is helpful in being an ally. And especially when men have some of the ear to the leadership or the boards and things like that within companies, use that for a positive influence.
Yeah, I suppose that's true of any privilege, isn't it? Not just in a male sense, but how do you use that for good? That's really powerful. I was just reflecting on the fact that I suppose like gender equality is not something that women can solve alone, right? We need equality in that conversation and for it to be a shared agenda, because women fighting on their own for equality is not really going to shift the dial. So yeah, I definitely agree that we need to work together on equality. And for me, I think allyship, particularly in the workplace, is critical. And, I think it's more than allyship, isn't it? It's like actual active sponsorship, actually like actively promoting the achievements of women. I know like in big corporate where I worked, there were a lot of occasions where I was the only woman in the room, and men that were allies would interrupt someone who just cut me off and said, hang on a second, Claire was speaking. And even just like small gestures like that, where they recognize typical dominant behaviors and actually speak up and say, hang on a second, Claire was talking. Like the impact that had like on me and my confidence was absolutely huge. And then to have, I suppose, like male advocates and sponsors, like you said, quite often they're closer to the top table, right? And being able to help to open doors for women. And I know talking to some men that they feel worried about doing that because of how it might be perceived. And also, so I think being able to like have that role model in those examples of like strong, confident male leaders who aren't afraid of what might be said about that and to make their intentions clear. I support and advocate for women. We need more of that. So having your CEO clearing his diary to make space for that conversation, I think is a really powerful sign, isn't it?
Well, and I love that you mentioned sponsorship, because one of the concepts that we've discussed in our monthly meetings of the Women's Employee Resource Group is mentorship versus sponsorship, and how
it's different. Yeah.
Absolutely. And I think that, for a long time, a lot of people thought it was just the same thing, but the more we talk about it, it's not. It's, mentorship being, yeah, I'm going to give you my advice, and, we talk, and I'm going to kind of sponsorship is really, advocating for you when you're not in the room. And I felt like that was always the best description that I'd heard of it. And most decisions about your career get made when you aren't in the room. You don't get to have that conversation about what type of raise you're going to get necessarily with the people who are deciding it. You get to have it with your direct manager a lot of times, but with the finance and the HR people that have to, pull all the levers and put all the numbers in the spreadsheet, you don't. Same things about promotions and things like that. So truly having an active sponsor makes such a bigger impact, I think, than a mentor. Not saying mentors aren't great. There's a role for both in multiple of each, but it is a difference.
Yeah, no, it's important to draw that distinction, isn't it? So I've got some more data here, some more stats, and it's actually this was from LinkedIn from this year, and it shows something really scary actually. And it described a continued erosion of women in leadership. So in 2022, the global hiring rate for women in leadership roles was over 38%, but that steadily declined each year and is now at 36%. So 2% drop. And this drop, though it may seem small, really shows a significant step back in the fight for gender equality, especially at a time where progress should be accelerating. So I just thought I'd ask you, why do you think we're seeing this decline in women's leadership roles? What do you think some of the causes might be?
Oh my gosh, I think there's so many. I think one of them being, they're kind of two, but related to each other, would be the pay gap and the rise of dual working households. So when, things like the pandemic hit and certain things like that, if you have a dual working household, and let's say for all things being equal, if you and your partner or spouse, have the same job, the same stress and all that, if women are making typically 70 to 80% on the dollar as the men, the person who's making the less money is going to be the one that steps back to take care of the household or, the children. When in the pandemic, there was a childcare issue. And so naturally, if you're just looking at the numbers, that makes sense. And that's unfortunate, because I think that's driving people away. I think that I think there's sort of a new move to underconsumption. I think both you and I were like rising up through corporate America in the 90s and 2000s and 2010s. And it just kind of was this go, 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 climb, 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 and just kind of got swept up in it, And so it was, let's be a leader. Let's try for as hard as you can. And a lot of people, not just women, but I do think that this is affecting women as well, of course, and probably mostly after the pandemic, took a step back and said, what do I really need? Do I really need all these things? Do I really need extra, or what do I really need? And sometimes I think that, the leadership is losing out. It's hard work. And some people, men and women, are looking at it and saying, I don't know if that's what I'm really looking for right now. I have what I need. And then in the leadership positions themselves, I mean, the feeling, it's more work. So if you're looking at that leadership position and you're looking at the peers that you might have, the male peers, and you're like, okay, so we're going to have the same job, the same stress, the same authority, but we're going to get paid significantly less, no, thank you. And so I think that for me, the biggest difference is the pay gap, but I think it is showing up in so many different ways. And that is what people are doing. I think the second piece of it is, that's the largest one. And then the other one too is, I think that, men and women are different in how they approach things. And I think that, so many researchers and people are just looking into these things constantly. And one of the things that has always stuck out to me is men will typically ask for what they want or go after things when they think maybe they're 70 or 80% qualified. they'll look at all these things and be like, I've got most of it. Let's go for it. Let's go for that leadership role. Let's go for that. And women tend to make sure we're 100% qualified first. I was talking to somebody in our women's employee resource group, and we were talking about this. And she said, yeah, there's this job that I really want to go for, but the one thing is it's a travel position and I can't travel because of, responsibilities I have at home. And I said, is that the only thing? Is that like, are you qualified for the rest of it? And she said, yeah. And I said, well, let's go. I want to help you. Let's go for it. Let's at least see. You never know unless you ask, apply for it. And a lot of companies anymore, there's so much remote. I mean, we're doing this across the Atlantic Ocean.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's so many opportunities now. I just want to be like, just because it says that, don't let that hold you back. Go for it. And sometimes I wonder if, that is having, kind of holding people off too. I mean, I remember it's another travel thing, but we used to post at an old job I had that was up to 50% travel. And we would joke between us who had the job, like, do you ever travel that much? No. Do you? Why are they putting that on the job description, right? Well, how many people probably didn't apply to that job because they couldn't do 50% travel? And it turned out that was not accurate anyway. So I think there's a lot of that. Now, the third thing I will say is I always say you don't have to be in a leadership role to be a leader. And I think another reason that maybe, so that's talking about leadership roles and jobs and things like that. But if you're just talking about leadership in general, I think sometimes women shy away from it because it really puts yourself out there and, puts yourself out there for like ridicule and things like that. And I mean, that's true for any person, but I think that, that's a hard thing to do. And I think some women just say it's not worth it, and how hard it's been for us historically, it really takes some amazing people to like break through that barrier. And I think too, that part of it can be very demoralizing that we've been doing this for so long, and trying so hard. And it's still, like you said, 5 generations to get to equality? Like sometimes you hear some of those statistics and just think, oh, what can I possibly do? So hopefully anyone who has thought that is listening to you and I, and it's like, keep going. You can do something, And I would love to like share that message. Every little bit counts, take that step into leadership, find a mentor, find a sponsor, find both. They're different. You need both. You need multiple. But I do think it's a lot of things like that might be happening. And then, top down, just the system itself. When companies are starting to tighten the belt, which they have in recent times with the economy, DEI really takes a hit. And I'm sure you probably have a whole nother list of stats. The articles that say the same thing, that unfortunately, DI initiatives and support and awareness, all of those take a hit when companies are tightening the belt. So, there's things that we women can do to help it, but at the same time, you got to change the system. There's only so much we can do, and we shouldn't have to be the ones that change it for us. I want to change it for ourselves, but we can't do it, like you said, by ourselves.
So much to unpick there. Gosh, where to begin? So I might start from the top. So, we're talking about like the reasons that this 2% drop had happened over the last couple of years. So I agree there's a lot to do with the pandemic in that societally there is still a greater expectation on women to take the lion's share of childcare. So even if mom and dad have equal pay, as in like they're earning the same amount, they both got like high pressure jobs, the expectation is still that mom would do the lion's share of the caretaking. When the schools all got closed and the lockdowns were happening, women were far more considerably impacted by those changes. And I don't know if you've heard this as well, but like I heard a lot of women talking about like losing their confidence during that time because they had to have such a shift in being like 90% mom in the home. They lost like a piece of themselves during that time when they were having to do the homeschool and everything else. And I don't know whether like now there's this rush to bring people back to the office where a lot of women actually found a good middle ground by being able to be that present parent and go for the school runs because they weren't in the office or they weren't being expected to travel so much. And now a lot of big companies are like, no, we want you back. And for women or the caregiver, let's say that could also equally be the guy, like losing that flexibility also is going to have a significant impact, isn't it? So I think there's probably like 2 years where women stopped progressing because they were trying to full-time parent and full-time work, and then kind of coming out, like how some of those more inclusive ways of working are now being pulled back again. And I think that's going to have another further impact going forward. So I can anticipate maybe that's going to continue to drop until things even out again. And something else that you mentioned was something that quite often used to get called a glass ceiling, that now I think is becoming a glass cliff. So women getting promoted into these senior roles where they've broken through the glass ceiling and then end up being put on a glass cliff and effectively being put at risk of being pushed over. Have you heard of that term?
I haven't. I was just
No,
going to say, it's interesting.
yeah, we yeah, we talked about it in relation actually mainly to like female politicians in the UK, but definitely for like senior women in leadership as well, because of the difference in like male and female leadership. There was something that happened recently. I saw it on the news where like a woman captain of a ship, the ship sank, and it became all about the fact that she was a woman captain. So gender
Because
being
no ship has ever sunk
no,
before until
never
there was a woman.
ever. Yeah, but business is going through difficult times, or there being like challenges, and there's a woman in charge. It then being her gender that's being brought into it is because she's a female leader. So yeah, I think it's interesting to see that transition from glass ceilings now, because there is so much, I suppose, like equality being built into law, particularly in the UK. Like discrimination against women is written into law. You can't do it. So more women have made progress, but then get put on these glass cliffs now, break through glass ceiling onto glass cliff, and off you go, which is really worrying. And then I thought it was really interesting what you were saying about the change in the way people perceive success and life. And I think it's kind of that capitalist culture. And I know when we've caught up previously, we were talking about things like trad wives emerging as a trend.
Oh my
So
gosh.
yeah, so like women on Instagram actually adopting the 1950s role of motherhood and being home to like cook your husband dinner and looking after the children, and actually fully embracing that as like the answer to
and I
that
think,
question.
yeah, my issue with the trad wives, the hashtag trad wives or traditional wives, I don't like trying to tell other people what to do with their time and how they want to live their life. That's
No, of course.
fine. But I think it's the social media of it all, and like making it this cool, fun thing, and like trying to gather others into it. I think it makes it just feel like we're going backwards. It's like we've had all these, leadership and empowerment and, go after yourself. And now these people are saying, come be in this cool thing called hashtag tradwives, And again, like if a person wants to be that in their relationship, power to them. But to try and recruit almost and like seek out and say like, this is a new movement, ladies, let's all do this. That's the part that to me just feels so backwards. Like we're going, backwards with so many different things. And I know, in the US, the repeal of, not to get to politics, but the repeal of Roe versus Wade, there's just a lot of different facets all of a sudden that feels like we're going backwards. And that can just be so demoralizing,
But it's interesting though, because you also mentioned, kind of like the noughties, 2010s. It was all about Sheryl Sandberg lean in, wasn't it? It was all about boss babe and girl boss, and like you said, being kind of pushed into being women that have it all. But they weren't saying, have a career and marry someone who'll stay home and look after the kids. It was like, you can have both. And the reality is, this is another statistic that I think is really interesting. Like, having kids takes up 60% of your attention. Having a career takes up 60% of your attention. Having a marriage or a partner takes up 60% of your attention. And there's no physical possibility that any one single person can do all three of those things simultaneously and have it all. And I don't know whether like this, like things like the trad wives movement is kind of like a counter to that, to say, actually, I'm gonna choose one thing and I'm gonna put 100% into it. And it just so happens that that is more societally acceptable than if I was a woman choosing to put 100% into my career and not choose that to be the children. Do you know what I mean? Even when I say it out loud, like women don't have that challenge, do they? Like, they get to be 100% career and nobody bats an eyelid. But if a woman makes that choice, makes that decision. And another interesting statistic is I read on the news this morning, actually, that by 2033, it's going to be 38% of women are going to be unmarried and not having children in the US.
That's terrifying.
It's terrifying, but also like interesting, right? Because like women are also now exercising their right to choose not to have children or follow that traditional route and just avoid all of those problems.
Yeah.
So we can focus on whatever we want.
I only say it's terrifying from the perspective of like, population and things like that, because it's not like someone else can step in to do that. But I think you're right. They're making their own choices. And with trad wives, the system and, the patriarchy isn't coming for trad wives. I haven't heard them beating down the doors like, don't do that. Right. But if there was hashtag be single, don't get married, work on your career and don't have kids, the system would be coming for that movement,
But interestingly, like a lot of women are now choosing to have solo parent, as in like the increase in like IVF of single women is shooting up massively. So it's just interesting how like this is all now disaggregating from the traditional societal stereotypes. And I think we just have to go back to, you talked about like the systemic level, because it's not women's role to change the system. It shouldn't be women's role to educate men necessarily on what they need to be doing differently. But that recognition that there are so many barriers and challenges that are at a level that require like governments and change to happen at such a different level than it is within our control. But I think a really important message that you delivered earlier on was to say, like keeping on fighting the good fight, doing what we can, encouraging things like really positive allyship with our male counterparts, and creating, I suppose, enough noise to want to not necessarily break the system, but let the system know that it's not okay. In the UK, we've had so much legislation passed that I think women are in a more secure position ever than from a legal standpoint, but I don't know whether that's filtering through into the US, particularly when you talk about things like Roe versus Wade being overturned and what might happen as a result of that. So scary times.
Although I would say one trend that I love that I'm seeing, and it was something we discussed a little bit in our Women's Summit last year, is, at first it was more about like, if you want to change it, we had to change ourselves. Like, oh, women in leadership, you want to be there, then be more like this. You need to do this. You need to go do this. And now I'm finding it's more, it's be yourselves and work on changing the system versus yourself. And so we talked about something called mirroring versus modeling, and saying, for a lot of folks, especially myself early in my career, you would see males in leadership and you'd mirror how they did it. Like, okay, so this guy, as an example, yells in meetings and cuts people off, and he has, and everyone respects him, and he's in this high, so I guess I'm going to have to go do that exact same thing. Right. That's the mirroring. But I think what's happening now, and what I try and foster too in conversations that I have, is more of the modeling. Like, okay, yelling, meeting, and cutting people off. Don't do that. That's probably not the best example, but like, what is the underlying concept that's showing? Oh, that's showing confidence in what they're saying and being proactive maybe. So now look at yourself and say, how can I exhibit confidence in being proactive? Not in that way, but in my own authentic way. And I think that stuff is now being more recognized. And like, at first it was women just act like males to get into those leadership roles. And now it's more act like yourself identify what some of those needs and leadership roles are, and how do you fulfill those needs without doing it the way someone else did. And for me specifically, I find myself currently in my career being able to be more authentic than I've ever been able to be in the past, because of those things, and saying, I am in a leadership role and I want to do it my way, not the way that was working in the past. I'll find the good pieces and model after that, but I'm not going to mirror what I've been seeing and just say that's the only way. And so I think that is a good trend that is starting to happen.
Yeah, and I think it's such an important point to emphasize what you just said there. Like, the change is not about women trying to change themselves, but about women and men collaborating to change the system. And the noughties and the tens, it wasn't that. It was all like what you need to change about yourself to succeed in the world, and be able to have it all and balance all of those things. And here's what you need to do differently about you. So I agree. I definitely agree with that. And I have so much faith in Gen Z. The most of my team are Gen Z. Like, they're just such different animals.
I agree. I was just listening to a book last night about talking, about, it was like
kids raised by millennials. This, like, our generation raising children. Like, I just love seeing how authentic and free the younger generation feels, especially women, in comparison. I know they've got a lot of other challenges with, like, social media that perhaps we didn't have, like, in our early teens, because we were analog. And still, like, had to phone people on actual phones back in the day. But that actually there are some really positive trends coming through.
It is. And I think women in, the younger generation of women as well, moving into those leadership positions, that's what's going to change the system.
Yeah.
And I think that that's how it's for both. It's the individual, but also that's what's going to change the system, because now the decisions that are being made will include and be inclusive of those diverse approaches and thought patterns. And hopefully that will start to shift everything to being more inclusive in general, is what I hope. But, as long as you've had the same type of people at the top that have the same approach and the same opinion, it's been hard for that system to change. But I think there's starting to be more and more, that are changing the things. And
that's the answer, isn't it, though, to this 500-year, sorry, I can't remember how many years it was that we quoted, how many years it's going to take to get to equality, but it's the pipeline now, right? So like, I know in customer experience we see this thing called the broken rung, as in 80% of the workforce are women, but only 38% get into management and only 12% get into leadership. And it's that first rung that's broken. So, the focus is always on, like, how do we get more women at the top, like the CEO and C-suite level? But actually, to get any of those women coming through to have a chance of being at the top, actually, we really need to be focusing on that first rung and supporting as many women as possible to take that first step into management, and supporting them, sponsoring them, bringing them through into leadership. And it isn't, focusing on things like, I don't know, chief, obviously you probably know them as an organization, very senior women supporting other very senior women. It's how do we reach back and give hands up to support women making that first step. And I know for me, like, I started out as a waitress and I worked my way up into general management through multiple layers in the front line of hospitality. If I hadn't have been encouraged and had that support and been talent spotted, like, there's no way I would have ended up being the head of customer experience at an absolutely gigantic retail company. But that's where it starts, isn't it? Those talented driven women who have potential, how do we help more of them to make that first step, which is critical, I think.
And I think kind of what you're saying is it's that for those who are making it and have finally made it, it's reaching back down and bringing those additional women up. Because I think too, in the previous decades, it was that feeling of like, well, there's only one seat at the table for a woman.
Protect it with your life.
I want to go get it, and then there was like this sense of competition. But I think that competition was being fueled by, again, I think the patriarchy in the system, because if you compete, then you're just keeping the one seat at the table. But I think that what I've been hearing a lot of women leaders say that I love lately is that we can all get here. There's room for all of us. There's room for everyone. It isn't just this finite thing. So come join me and bring people along. And it doesn't have to be me or you. It can be me and you. And I think the more people that have that perspective will help raise, the rising tide raises all ships, and we can get everybody up there. At our conference, there was some karaoke, of course, but it's a staple of the Coal Miner Conference. So if anyone wants to come, if you love karaoke, this is the conference for you. But there was a Taylor Swift song, right? And I love how she always says, like, hey, we all have crowns. Like, we just realized we all have crowns. So everybody, chill out and like let everybody be up there. And it isn't I'm going to get there and I got to push down other people. It's there's a room, there's a seat right next to me. And there's a seat next to you. So let's grab
that chair. Yeah.
Exactly. Let's grab everybody, because for the few who have made it, what have you learned? What, what's the great thing? What can we bring? And how can we just get more representation and more inclusiveness into every facet?
Yeah. And I think that's kind of my final reflection on that. When you said about mirroring, remembering what senior female leaders looked like on my way up. Typically, they'd cut their hair really short. They were wearing pantsuits. They'd abandoned their femininity. They were aggressive, dominant, basically, behaved like men to get there. And in my kind of like middle stage career, I experienced a lot of that kind of, there's only one seat here, you're definitely not going to come and sit next to me, competitive, if anything, kind of like toxic female leadership, which was one of my inspirations for women in CX and wanting to change that. So, talk about the seat at the table. I just thought, why don't we just build a bigger table? We'll build our own online community. And we'll just make it happen.
That. Yeah. There's got to be a book out there with that title somewhere, right? Or if not, you need to write it.
I'll put that on my list to do. But Jill, listen, we're out of time. It's been absolutely amazing to hang out with you. I just think we could carry on talking all day long, but it's absolutely fantastic.
I'm like, and then there's
and then we might need to do a part 2, or hopefully if I see you in Texas next week for our unconference, we'll get to talk a lot more. But just congratulations on starting the Women's Employee Resource Group at Coal Miner. Coal Miner has been an absolutely amazing support to us here at Women in CX. We wouldn't have got where we've got without the support that you guys have put behind us. So just huge thanks for spending time with me today, being part of our community, and just
thank you. And shout out to all the women that I work with that planned the Women's Summit, and they come to the monthly, because everyone gets busy and it's hard to carve out an hour, but every time that we meet, we're just like, oh, this is so great. I wish I could start every day this way. And so, I really just appreciate all the women I work for, all the men that support us. Coal Miner, it's a good place for women, and it's getting better every day. And so I love being able to be a part of that. I'm just very grateful. And grateful to be a part of Women in CX too. You have a great organization. It's been so fun, and I really appreciate this opportunity to have that dialogue.
Love. Thank you. I'll see you next time, Jill, and take care, everybody. Bye for now.
Bye.
Thanks for listening to the Women in CX Talk Trends podcast with me, Claire Muscat. If you'd like to support our mission to amplify the voices of women in CX and technology and share more diverse perspectives on the latest trends shaping our industry, we'd love to hear from you. If you'd like to be featured on the podcast, please get in touch with us at partnerships@womenincx.community. Well, that's all for now. See you all next time.